The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the enormous space. Ambassador Hyun-woo walked through them, his black diplomatic suit a stark contrast against the shimmering walls of crystalline technology that surrounded him. His footsteps clicked against the polished floor as he made his way to the center of the chamber, where a single human-sized platform waited. Above him, the representatives of 43 different alien species looked down from their elevated positions. The Velthari delegation sparkled like living diamonds, their crystalline forms refracting light in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The Nethys collective appeared as floating clouds of gas contained within transparent environmental suits, their thoughts visible as swirling colors within their gaseous bodies. The Mechanical Forge Syndicate representatives stood motionless, their metal frames gleaming under the chamber's artificial lighting. Hyun-woo had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 12 years. He had seen many heated debates in this chamber, but none quite like today. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every alien eye, sensor, and optical device was focused on him as he stepped onto the speaking platform. Council Speaker Zeftar, a towering Velthari whose crystal body contained swirling patterns of blue and gold, activated the chamber's translation systems. When he spoke, his voice came out in perfectly clear English through the speakers around Hyun-woo's platform. Ambassador Hyun-woo of the species known as humanity, Zeftar began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with leading the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. You stand before this council to receive our final decision regarding human expansion beyond your home system. Hyun-woo nodded respectfully, though his jaw was set in a hard line. He had expected this moment for months, ever since the complaints about human colonies had started flooding the council chambers. The accusations were always the same. Humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed free expansion across the galaxy. The Council has reviewed the evidence presented over the past standard year, Zeftar continued. Human settlements have expanded to 47 systems beyond Sol. In each case, these expansions have been accompanied by what this council considers excessive military preparation, aggressive terraforming practices, and concerning population growth rates. A representative from the Aquatic Union, a species that resembled a cross between a dolphin and an octopus, activated their speaking rights. Their translated voice bubbled through the chamber. The humans build weapons platforms around every colony. They terraform planets to suit only their needs, showing no consideration for existing ecosystems. They reproduce at rates that suggest plans for rapid territorial expansion. Hyun-woo felt his hands clench into fists at his sides, but he kept his expression neutral. These were the same accusations he had been hearing for years. The other species seemed unable to understand that humans built defenses because they had learned hard lessons about being unprepared. They terraformed planets because that was how they survived. They had large families because they valued life and growth. The Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision, Zeftar announced, and Hyun-woo felt his stomach drop. Unanimous decisions were rare and usually meant serious trouble for whoever was on the receiving end. Humanity will immediately cease all colonization activities beyond the Sol system. All existing human colonies beyond your home system will be placed under Galactic Council oversight. Human military vessels will be restricted to patrol duties within Sol system boundaries only. Any violation of these restrictions will result in immediate sanctions, up to and including military intervention by Council forces. The chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of the environmental systems. Hyun-woo stood perfectly still, processing what he had just heard. After a long moment, he looked up at the Council Speaker. Council Speaker Zeftar, I request a 24-hour recess to consult with my government regarding this decision. Granted, Zeftar replied. You have one standard day to return with your government's response. As Hyun-woo walked out of the chamber, he could feel the eyes of 43 species watching his every move. None of them knew what was coming. None of them understood what they had just done. Back in his quarters aboard Nexus Prime Station, Hyunwoo activated his quantum communicator and established a secure link to Earth. Within minutes, he was speaking directly with Prime Minister In-soo in Seoul. "They want to cage us," Hyunwoo reported simply. "Complete expansion ban, council oversight of existing colonies, military restrictions to Seoul system only." Prime Minister In-soo was quiet for a long moment. "What's your assessment, Hyunwoo?" "They're afraid of us, sir. They see our military preparations and our expansion rate, and they think we're planning to conquer the galaxy. They don't understand that we're just being careful. They don't understand human nature at all." "And they never will," In-soo replied grimly. "I'm calling an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. We'll have an answer for you in 18 hours. While he waited, Hyunwoo found himself thinking about the past 12 years of human participation in galactic civilization. He remembered Dr. Yoon-ji's breakthrough in treating the Red Plague that had been devastating the Outer Rim worlds. Her medical innovations had saved billions of alien lives. He thought about Captain Dong-hyun's joint military operations against the Void Pirates, where human tactics and bravery had protected dozens of alien colonies. He remembered Engineer So-young's revolutionary terraforming techniques that had turned barren rocks into garden worlds, providing homes for refugee populations from 3 different species. He thought about the trade agreements, the cultural exchanges, the scientific collaborations that had benefited every member of the Galactic Council. Apparently, none of that mattered when fear took hold. 18 hours later, Hyunwoo's communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Prime Minister In-soo's face appeared on the screen, and his expression told Hyunwoo everything he needed to know. "The Global Defense Council has voted," In-soo said. "Unanimous decision. We're done. With the Galactic Council. Complete withdrawal? Complete withdrawal. Economic, military, diplomatic, scientific, everything. If they want to treat us like a threat, we'll show them what an actual threat looks like." Hyunwoo nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. Any special instructions for my final address to the council?" "Be polite," In-soo said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're going to need them to remember that we gave them every chance to do this the easy way." The next day, Hyunwoo walked back into the council chambers. The same 43 species were waiting, expecting either humanity's submission or defiance that they could quickly crush. They got neither. "Council Speaker Zeftar," Hyunwoo said when he reached the speaking platform, "I come before you today not to negotiate, but to inform you of humanity's decision regarding our membership in the Galactic Council." The chamber was completely silent. Effective immediately, humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council and all associated treaties, agreements, and obligations. We will be taking our people, our technology, and our resources back to Sol System. Any attempt to interfere with this withdrawal will be considered an act of war. The stunned silence stretched for nearly a minute before Zeftar found his voice. "Ambassador, surely your government understands the consequences of this decision. No species has ever survived isolation from galactic civilization." Hyunwoo looked up at the crystalline being and smiled. "Council Speaker, with respect, no species like humanity has ever tried." He turned and walked toward the chamber doors, then paused and looked back one final time. "We came to you as partners, hoping to build something better together. Since you see us only as a threat, we'll show you what that actually looks like. Good day!" The doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder, and Hyunwoo never looked back. 6 months had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was starting to notice something strange. Admiral Tae-hyun stood on the bridge of the transport ship New Seoul, watching through the main view screen, as another group of human cargo vessels disappeared into hyperspace, heading toward Sol System. "That's the last convoy from the Kepler colonies, sir," reported Lieutenant So Min from her station. All 47 colonies are now completely evacuated. Tae-hyun nodded grimly. Any word from the other sectors? Commander Ji-hai reports that the mining operations in the Vega system have been shut down and all equipment removed. Captain Woo Sung confirms that the last medical station in the Outer Rim has been dismantled. Every human facility outside Sol system is now officially closed. It was the largest evacuation in galactic history, and somehow humanity had managed to pull it off in less than 6 months. Not just people, but everything. Every piece of technology, every medical facility, every terraforming device, every mining platform. If humans had built it, they took it with them when they left. The aliens were beginning to panic. Dr. Wu Jin, a Velthari xenobiologist who had spent decades studying human behavior, stood before an emergency session of the Velthari High Council. His crystalline form flickered with patterns of deep concern as he presented his findings. Honored council members, he began, his translated voice carrying undertones of worry that even the translation systems couldn't hide. I have completed my analysis of human evacuation patterns, and the results are deeply troubling. The High Council chamber fell silent. Wu Jin activated a holographic display showing human colony locations and evacuation timelines. At first, we assumed the humans were retreating in fear, perhaps hoping that a show of submission would convince the Galactic Council to reconsider the restrictions. However, the pattern of their withdrawal suggests something entirely different. The hologram zoomed in on specific evacuation sites. Notice how they removed not just their people, but all technology and infrastructure. They didn't abandon their colonies, they stripped them completely. This level of systematic removal suggests long-term planning, not panic. One of the High Council members, an ancient Velthari whose crystal body had turned deep purple with age, leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Dr. Wu Jin? I've studied human historical patterns extensively. When humans perform complete withdrawals like this, it's not because they're retreating in defeat. It's because they're preparing for something much larger. In their own history, they call this strategic retreat. They pull back completely, consolidate their resources, and then respond with overwhelming force. The chamber erupted in flashes of concerned light as the council members communicated among themselves in rapid crystal pulses. Dr. Wu Jin waited for them to settle before continuing. There's something else. The humans have been removing systems that other species depend on. Medical facilities that were treating alien patients, terraforming equipment that was maintaining alien agricultural worlds, mining operations that were providing rare elements for galactic infrastructure. They didn't just leave, they took away things that the galaxy needs. Meanwhile, on the agricultural world of Demeter III, Governor Kethulan of the local Velthari administration was discovering exactly what Dr. Wu Jin meant. The human terraforming station that had been maintaining the planet's atmosphere for the past 8 years had simply vanished overnight, along with all the human technicians who operated it. How long before the atmospheric processors fail completely? Kethulan asked his science officer. Without human maintenance, maybe 6 months. The systems are incredibly complex and we don't fully understand how they work. We never needed to learn because the humans always handled it. Kethulan felt his crystal body dim with worry. Demeter III fed 12 different star systems. If the terraforming failed, billions would go hungry. Captain Ji-hai commanded the last human ship leaving the industrial complex at Rigel 7, the Busan. Rising was loaded with manufacturing equipment that had been producing advanced components for galactic communication networks. As they prepared to jump to hyperspace, her communications officer received an urgent transmission. Captain, we're getting emergency calls from the Forge Syndicate. They're asking us to delay departure so they can negotiate keeping some of the manufacturing equipment here. Ji-hai looked out at the industrial platforms they were leaving behind. Without the human-designed equipment, those platforms would be able to produce maybe 30% of their current output. The galaxy's communication network would start breaking down within a year. Tell them negotiations ended 6 months ago, she replied coldly. Execute the jump. The Busan Rising disappeared into hyperspace, taking with it the last human presence in the Rigel system. Back on Earth, Prime Minister In-soo sat in his office reviewing reports from the evacuation operations. Admiral Tae-hyun had just returned from overseeing the final convoys, and his report was comprehensive. All human personnel and equipment have been successfully withdrawn from galactic space, Tae-hyun reported. Zero casualties, minimal equipment loss. The operation went more smoothly than we had hoped. Any response from the Galactic Council? Confusion, mostly. Some demands that we explain our actions, but no actual attempts to interfere. I think they're still trying to figure out what we're doing. In-soo nodded. How are our defensive preparations coming along? Ahead of schedule. Engineer So-young's team has completed the new defensive platforms around Sol system. Captain Dong-hyun reports that the fleet upgrades are 60% complete. Dr. Yoon-ji's research division has finished developing countermeasures for every known alien weapon system. And the other projects? Also progressing well. We'll be ready for whatever comes next. 3 months later, the galaxy was beginning to understand the scope of what humanity had taken with them. On the medical station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Dr. Kel Nara of the Aquatic Union was watching her patients die from a disease that should have been easily treatable. The human medical scanners were the only devices capable of detecting this particular strain of the Red Plague in its early stages, she explained to her assistant. Without early detection, the treatment protocols are useless. We're back to treating symptoms instead of curing the disease. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. Mining operations were failing without human engineering expertise. Agricultural worlds were slowly reverting to uninhabitable wastelands without human terraforming technology. Communication networks were breaking down without human-manufactured components. The Galactic Council called emergency session after emergency session, but there were no easy solutions. They had become dependent on human contributions without even realizing it. Council Speaker Zeftar stood before a mostly empty chamber. Many species representatives were dealing with crises in their home systems and couldn't attend. Those who were present looked worried and confused. "We need to establish contact with the human government," announced Representative Vaxmore of the Forge Syndicate. His mechanical voice carried overtones of desperation. "Our manufacturing output has dropped by 40% since they left. If this continues, our entire economy will collapse." "The humans have made their position clear," Zeftar replied. "They consider Sol system to be a closed border. Any non-human vessel that enters will be treated as an act of war." "Then we need to find another way to reach them," insisted Dr. Kellen of the Aquatic Union. "The plague is spreading through the outer rim faster than we can treat it. Without human medical technology, we could lose entire worlds." Zeftar's crystal body flickered with patterns of uncertainty. "What are you suggesting?" "We send them a message through neutral channels, explain the situation. Surely they don't want to see innocent people suffer." "Do we?" asked Representative Thiss of the insectoid hives, her translated voice carrying bitter irony. "Because 6 months ago we told them that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom in galactic space. We treated them like a threat that needed to be contained. Why would they help us now?" The chamber fell silent as the representatives faced an uncomfortable truth. They had driven away the one species that was holding their civilization together, and now they were facing the consequences. Outside the council chambers, across 43 different star systems, billions of aliens were learning the same hard lesson. Humanity hadn't been conquering the galaxy, they had been maintaining it, and now they were gone. 18 months after humanity's departure from galactic space, Dr. Yoon-ji's medical warning system on the Nethys collective homeworld began its final sequence of failure alerts. The sophisticated monitoring equipment she had installed 5 years earlier was designed to detect and prevent the spread of viral plagues that could devastate gas-based life forms. Without proper maintenance, the system was now completely offline. Collective Prime Nethys floated in his environmental chamber, watching helplessly as the infection rates climbed on the main display. The Red Plague had mutated into something far worse than anything they had seen before. And without human medical technology, they had no way to track its spread or develop effective treatments. "How many systems are affected?" he asked his medical coordinator. 17. Collective worlds. Prime. The plague is spreading faster than our transport networks can carry medical supplies. We estimate we'll lose 40% of our population within 6 months if we can't find a solution. Nethys swirled with patterns of deep sorrow. The Nethys Collective had been one of the strongest supporters of restricting human expansion. They had argued that humanity's rapid medical innovations gave them unfair advantages in treating biological threats. Now they were dying from diseases that humans could have easily cured. Have we received any response to our requests for medical assistance? None, Prime. The humans maintain complete silence. Sol system remains closed to all outside contact. On the agricultural world of new series, Governor Kethulan watched through his office window as vast fields of crops withered under a dying sky. The human terraforming systems had finally failed completely 3 weeks ago, and the planet's artificial atmosphere was breaking down faster than anyone had predicted. His agricultural coordinator approached with the latest reports, his crystal form flickering with barely controlled panic. "Governor, the atmospheric processors have stopped working entirely. We have maybe 2 months before the air becomes unbreathable. What about evacuation? We can move maybe 10% of the population before the atmosphere fails. The rest..." The coordinator's crystal body dimmed to almost black. 3 billion people, Governor. We don't have enough transport capacity." Kethulan turned away from the window. New Ceres was just one of dozens of agricultural worlds that were failing. Without human maintenance, the galaxy's food production was collapsing, and billions were already going hungry. Send another emergency request to the Galactic Council. Tell them we need immediate assistance. Sir, the Council has no resources to help us. Half their member worlds are dealing with similar crises. In the Forge Syndicate's primary manufacturing sector, General Vaxmore stood among the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's most advanced production facility. The human-designed manufacturing systems had been producing critical components for faster-than-light travel, but without human engineers to maintain them, the automated systems had started producing defective parts. "How many ships have been lost to FTL failures?" he asked his logistics officer. 47 vessels in the past month, General. The contaminated components are causing cascade failures in hyperspace engines. Pilots are refusing to make long-distance jumps because they don't trust their ships. Vaxmore's mechanical form processed this information with growing alarm. The Forge Syndicate's entire economy was built on rapid transport between star systems. If ships couldn't safely jump to hyperspace, their civilization would collapse within months. What about our stockpiles of human-manufactured components? Exhausted. Sir, we used the last of them 2 weeks ago. Every new component we produce has the contamination problem. The General's optical sensors dimmed. So our ships are grounded. Effectively, yes, sir, but the worst revelation came from an unexpected source. Captain Dong Hyun's former alien colleague, Commander Thexol of the Unified Defense Force, was reviewing old security reports when he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. For years, the Galactic Council had assumed that their early warning systems were functioning perfectly, detecting and tracking any potential threats from outside the galaxy. What Thexol discovered was that humans had been quietly managing most of these systems, using their own monitoring stations to fill gaps in galactic coverage. "This can't be right," he muttered, staring at the data on his screen. According to these records, over 60% of the galaxy's perimeter monitoring was being handled by human facilities that were now gone. He called up current sensor readings from the galactic edge and felt his heart sink. Massive blank zones appeared on the display, areas where they had no monitoring coverage at all. They were essentially blind to any external threats. Thexol immediately sent an emergency report to Galactic Defense Command, but it was already too late. The first Void Swarm scouts had been probing the galaxy's defenses for weeks, using the sensor dead zones to hide their movements. The Void Swarm was an extragalactic parasite species that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty space. They had been pressing against the galaxy's borders for decades, held back only by careful monitoring and rapid response from defense forces. Without the human early warning systems, the swarm had found dozens of undefended entry points. Commander, Thexol's worst fears were confirmed when the first reports started coming in from the Outer Rim territories. 3 entire star systems had gone dark within a week, all communications lost, all ships vanished. The few escape pods that made it to safety brought terrifying stories of planets being consumed by living darkness that devoured everything in its path. "We need to contact the humans immediately," Thexol told his commanding officer. "They knew about the swarm threat. They were monitoring the entry points. They might be the only ones who know how to fight these things." "The humans aren't taking our calls," his commander replied grimly. "Sol system remains completely isolated. Any ship that approaches their borders is warned off by automated defense systems. Then we need to break through their isolation. This is about the survival of the entire galaxy. With what ships? Half our fleet is grounded because of the FTL component failures. The other half is needed to try to slow down the swarm advance." As if summoned by their conversation, alarms began, blaring throughout the command center. The main display lit up with emergency signals from the Perseus arm, where 5 more star systems had just stopped transmitting. Dr. Wu Jin, the Velthari scientist who had tried to warn the Council about human strategic patterns, was now leading a desperate research effort to understand what humanity had been doing during their years in galactic space. What he found painted a picture of a species that had been quietly holding galactic civilization together. "They weren't just participating in our society," he explained to an emergency session of scientists from 12 different species. "They were maintaining it. Every critical system, every essential service, every defensive measure that kept us safe and prosperous had human involvement." "But why?" asked Dr. Keelan of the Aquatic Union. "Why did they take on so much responsibility?" "Because they saw problems that needed solving and they solved them," Wu Jin replied. "They didn't ask for permission or recognition. They just saw what needed to be done and did it. We mistook their competence for aggression." The irony was devastating. The Galactic Council had restricted humanity because they seemed too capable, too prepared, too ready for any challenge. They had been afraid that humans were planning to conquer the galaxy. In reality, humans had been preventing the galaxy from falling apart. Now, as worlds died from plagues, as agricultural systems failed, as transportation networks collapsed, and as extragalactic invaders consumed entire star systems, the galaxy was learning what life was like without human protection. Council Speaker Zeftar called what would be the last normal session of the Galactic Council. Only 20 species were represented, the rest being too busy dealing with crises to attend. The chamber, once filled with the confident voices of 43 species planning their galactic future, now echoed with desperate pleas for solutions that no one had. "The situation has become critical," Zeftar announced, his crystal form flickering with patterns of barely controlled despair. "We are facing simultaneous crises across multiple sectors. Food production has dropped by 70%. Medical facilities are overwhelmed with untreatable diseases. Transportation between systems has become unreliable and dangerous. And now we face an external threat that we are completely unprepared to handle." Representative Theiss of the insectoid hives buzzed with agitation. "The humans knew this would happen. They warned us that we were dependent on their systems and we ignored them." "They could have explained the extent of their involvement," protested Representative Moores of the Silicon Confederacy. "Would we have listened?" Theiss shot back. "We saw their preparations and called them aggressive. We saw their expansion and called them dangerous. We saw their competence and called them a threat. Every time they tried to work with us, we found..." reasons to restrict them further. The chamber fell silent as the representatives faced the truth. They had driven away the only species capable of dealing with the crises now threatening to destroy galactic civilization. 2 years after humanity's departure from galactic space, Council Speaker Zeftar stood on the bridge of the massive diplomatic vessel Unity's Hope, staring at the boundary of Sol System. Behind him, the largest diplomatic fleet in galactic, history waited in formation. Representatives from every surviving member species of the Galactic Council, desperate to reach the humans who had once been their partners. "Any response to our communications?" Zeftar asked his communications officer. "Nothing. Speaker, the humans maintain complete radio silence. We've transmitted surrender documents, apology statements, and pleas for assistance in 43 different languages. They acknowledge our presence, but refuse all contact." Zeftar's crystal form flickered with patterns of desperation. The galaxy was dying. The Red Plague had spread to over 200 worlds. Agricultural failures had caused famine across entire sectors. The Void Swarm had consumed 43 star systems and was accelerating toward the galactic core. Every day of delay meant billions more deaths. "Take us to the Sol system boundary," he ordered. "If they won't talk to us from a distance, maybe they'll respond when we're at their doorstep." As the diplomatic fleet approached the edge of Sol system, automated warning beacons activated, broadcasting in clear galactic standard. "This is Sol Defense Command. You are approaching restricted space. Any non-human vessel crossing this boundary will be considered an act of war. Turn back immediately." "Ignore the warnings," Zeftar commanded. "Continue approach." What happened next shattered every assumption the aliens had about human capabilities during their isolation. The empty space around Sol system suddenly filled with ships, massive vessels of designs nobody had ever seen before, armed with weapons that made the sensors scream warnings about energy signatures beyond anything in galactic databases. Admiral Tae-hyun watched the alien fleet from the bridge of his flagship, Incheon's Pride, a massive dreadnought that had been built in the shipyards of Mars during humanity's 2 years of isolation. The ship's weapons systems were charged and ready, powered by technology that the galactic community wouldn't develop for another century. "Alien fleet has crossed the boundary line, Admiral," reported his tactical officer. "Orders?" "Signal the fleet to power weapons but hold fire," Tae-hyun replied calmly. "Let them see what they're dealing with before we decide whether to vaporize them or just send them home with a warning." The diplomatic fleet's sensors went crazy as they detected the human weapons. Energy readings that should have been impossible, gravitational distortions that suggested weapons capable of destroying entire planets, and shielding technology that made the human ships nearly invisible to conventional scanners. "How is this possible?" whispered the Velthari science officer aboard the Unity's Hope. "These energy signatures suggest they've advanced their technology by decades in just 2 years." Zeftar stared at the human ships surrounding his fleet, and finally understood what humanity had been doing during their isolation. They hadn't been hiding in defeat. They had been preparing for war. "Open a channel to the human admiral," he ordered. Admiral Tae-hyun accepted the communication request and appeared on the alien's main screen. He looked older than when he had served in joint galactic operations, and his expression was cold as winter stone. "Council Speaker Zeftar," Tae-hyun said without preamble. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you violated our sovereignty before I order my fleet to remove you from our space permanently." "Admiral, please," Zeftar began, his crystal form flickering with desperate urgency. "The galaxy is dying. We need humanity's help. We were wrong to restrict your expansion. We surrender completely to any terms you wish to set." "Too late," Tae-hyun replied simply. "You made your choice 2 years ago. We're no longer part of galactic civilization. The Void Swarm has breached galactic defenses. They're consuming everything in their path. Without your early warning systems, we can't stop them." For just a moment, Tae-hyun's expression softened slightly. We know about the swarm. We've been tracking their movement since they entered galactic space. Then you'll help us fight them? Why would we? You told us we were too dangerous to be part of galactic society. You restricted our expansion and threatened us with military action. Now you want our protection? Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Yunji received a desperate communication from her former colleague, Dr. Wu Jin of the Velthari. The alien scientist had managed to establish a secret channel through old research networks, bypassing the official diplomatic restrictions. "Dr. Yunji, please," came Wu Jin's translated voice through her private communicator. "The Red Plague has mutated beyond anything we can treat. Billions are dying. Your medical protocols could save them." Yunji sat in her laboratory, surrounded by advanced medical equipment that represented years of accelerated research during humanity's isolation. She had indeed developed cures for the new plague variants, along with treatments for dozens of other diseases that were ravaging alien populations. "Dr. Wu Jin," she replied sadly, "the Galactic Council made their position clear. Humanity is no longer responsible for galactic medical emergencies. But surely you don't want innocent people to suffer." "I don't," Yunji admitted. "But I also don't help those who threaten my people. The Council didn't just restrict our expansion, Wu Jin. They threatened to use military force against human colonies. They saw our medical advances and called them unfair advantages. They wanted us contained like dangerous animals. We were wrong. We admit we were wrong. Yes, you were. But admitting mistakes doesn't bring back trust." The communication ended, leaving Dr. Wu Jin staring at a blank screen while plague victims died in medical centers across Velthari space. Back in space, Admiral Tae-hyun was receiving updates from Captain Ji-hee, who commanded humanity's new Deep Space Reconnaissance Division. Her ships had been monitoring the Void Swarm's advance using technology far superior to anything the galactic community possessed. "Admiral, the swarm has reached the Andromeda trade routes," Ji-hee reported. "They're accelerating their consumption rate. At current speed, they'll reach the galactic core within 8 months. Any change in their behavior patterns?" "Yes, sir. They appear to be learning from each world they consume. Their tactics are adapting, becoming more efficient. They're also reproducing faster than our initial estimates suggested." Tae-hyun nodded grimly. Humanity had been developing countermeasures against the Void Swarm for 2 years, but those countermeasures were designed specifically to protect human space. The rest of the galaxy would have to face the swarm without any protection. "Continue monitoring," he ordered, "but maintain the quarantine boundary. No assistance to galactic forces unless specifically authorized by the Prime Minister." The final, desperate attempt came when the remaining members of the Galactic Council voted to make an unprecedented offer. They would formally dissolve the Council and surrender complete governing authority to humanity if the humans would return and save what was left of galactic civilization. The message was delivered by Ambassador Hyun-woo's replacement, a young diplomat named Min-ji, who had taken over human affairs during the evacuation. She stood before what remained of the Galactic Council, now reduced to only 15 species, and delivered humanity's response. "The government of Seoul recognizes the dissolution of the Galactic Council," she announced to the nearly empty chamber. "However, we do not accept responsibility for galactic governance at this time. Humanity will consider requests for assistance on a case-by-case basis with full compensation and guarantees required for any aid provided." The few remaining representatives erupted in protests and pleas, but Minji continued with professional coldness. "Furthermore, any future government structure in this galaxy will recognize Sol system sovereignty and humanity's right to unrestricted expansion. Any species or government that threatens human interests will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." Zeftar's crystal form dimmed to almost black. "Ambassador, surely you understand that without immediate assistance, there may be no galactic civilization left to govern." "That," Minji replied with the same cold smile that Hyun-woo had shown 2 years earlier, "is no longer humanity's problem. Say," she left the chamber, The remaining council members sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full scope of what they had lost. They had feared humanity's strength and capability, so they had driven them away. Now they were facing the consequences of a galaxy without human protection. Outside the council station, the Void Swarm continued its relentless advance toward the galactic core, consuming world after world while the galaxy's remaining defenders proved helpless to stop them. The universe was learning that there were worse things than having humans as neighbors. One of them was not having humans as neighbors at all. Prime Minister Insu stood before the assembled representatives of the Sol Collective, humanity's new governing body that had replaced their participation in galactic politics. The massive conference room in Geneva buzzed with quiet conversation, as Earth's greatest leaders debated the most important decision in human history. "The situation is clear," Insu began, activating the holographic display that showed the galaxy's current state. Red zones marked areas consumed by the Void Swarm, yellow zones showed regions affected by plague and famine, and green zones indicated the few remaining stable sectors. The display was mostly red and yellow. The Galactic Council has formally dissolved and surrendered governing authority to humanity. 43 star systems have been consumed by the Void Swarm. Plague has spread to over 300 worlds. Agricultural failures have caused famine across 60% of inhabited space. Transportation networks have collapsed in most sectors. Foreign Minister Hyun Woo, who had returned to Earth after the Council's dissolution, presented 3 options to the Assembly. "We have 3 choices," he announced. "First, we can let the galaxy burn. Maintain our isolation and let the other species deal with the consequences of their decisions. Second, we can intervene militarily, save what's left, and rule as conquerors. Third, we can return as reluctant guardians, taking permanent control but focusing on restoration rather than conquest." The debate that followed was intense. Dr. Yoonji argued for selective intervention, proposing that they save species and individuals who had shown humanity respect while letting the corrupt systems that had driven them away collapse completely. "We have the medical technology to cure the plagues and the agricultural knowledge to restore food production," she said. "But we should only help those who acknowledge that they need us. The Aquatic Union voted against our restrictions. The insectoid hives tried to find compromise solutions. These species deserve our assistance. Admiral Tae Hyun advocated for complete military intervention with humanity as the galaxy's new hegemon. The other species have proven they can't govern themselves. They nearly destroyed galactic civilization within 2 years of our departure. If we're going to save them, we need to make sure they never have the power to threaten us again." Engineer So Young proposed a middle path, suggesting they save the galaxy but restructure it completely under human oversight. "We rebuild everything, from the ground up. New technology, new systems, new governments, all designed and controlled by humans. We become the permanent caretakers of galactic civilization." The debate was interrupted by Captain Ji Hai, who burst into the chamber with urgent news from her reconnaissance division. "Prime Minister, we have a critical situation. The Void Swarm isn't just consuming worlds anymore. They're learning and adapting at an exponential rate. Our latest intelligence shows they've begun incorporating technology from the civilizations they've consumed. They're developing new capabilities, and some of their newer bioships are showing resistance to our current weapons." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Ji Hai continued with growing urgency. "Sir, at their current rate of adaptation and expansion, they'll reach the galactic core within 4 months. Once they consume the core worlds and their industrial capacity, they'll become powerful enough to threaten even Sol system. Our window for action is closing rapidly." Insu looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders. "The decision is made for us, then. We can't let the swarm grow strong enough to threaten Earth. The question now is not whether we intervene, but how we structure the galaxy after we save it." The vote was unanimous. humanity would return to galactic space, not as the hopeful partners they had once been, but as the reluctant rulers of a civilization that had proven it couldn't survive without them. Operation Galaxy's Dawn began 3 days later. Captain Dong Hyun led the first wave of human ships back into galactic space, but these weren't the same vessels that had evacuated 2 years earlier. Human military technology had advanced dramatically during their isolation, and their new weapons were designed specifically to combat the Void Swarm. The first engagement took place in the Cygnus sector, where a swarm fleet was consuming the industrial world of Factorum Prime. Dong Hyun's task force dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began deploying weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. "Deploy the stellar disruption torpedoes," Dong Hyun ordered. "Target the swarm's feeding vessels first." The weapons that humanity unleashed were devastating beyond anything in galactic experience. Torpedoes that could destabilize star systems, making them uninhabitable to the Void Swarm. Energy weapons that could sterilize entire planets, burning away the swarm's organic components while leaving the underlying rock untouched. Defensive systems that created zones of space where swarm bioships simply couldn't function. Within 6 hours, the swarm fleet at Factorum Prime had been completely destroyed, and the human ships were already moving to the next engagement. Dr. Yunji returned to galactic space aboard the medical ship Soul's Mercy, carrying treatments and cures that could save trillions of lives. But her assistance came with strict conditions. Every species that received human medical aid had to formally acknowledge human authority and agree to new governmental structures designed by human political scientists. "The plague treatments will be administered by human medical teams only," she announced to the desperate alien leaders. "Human medical facilities will be established on your worlds under human control. Any interference with our medical operations will result in immediate withdrawal of aid." The aliens had no choice but to agree. Dr. Wu Jin, the Velthari scientist, who had once studied human behavior, now found himself working under Dr. Yunji's supervision as she saved his species from extinction. "I studied your people for decades," he told her as they worked together to treat plague victims. "I thought I understood human nature. I was wrong about everything." "What did you get wrong?" Yunji asked while programming a medical scanner. "I thought your preparations and military buildup meant you were planning conquest. I didn't realize you were just being thorough. Humans don't do anything halfway, do they?" "No," Yunji replied sadly. "We don't. When we're your partners, we give everything to the relationship. When we're your enemies, we make sure the threat is eliminated permanently. The Galactic Council chose which one they wanted." Meanwhile, Engineer So Young was leading the restoration of agricultural and industrial systems across dozens of worlds. But unlike the old days when humans worked alongside alien engineers, these new installations were entirely human-designed and human-controlled. "The terraforming stations will be fully automated and controlled from Sol System," she explained to Governor Kethulan on New Series. "You'll have no access to the control systems. If your world maintains compliance with human authority, the systems will continue functioning. Any rebellion or resistance will result in immediate shutdown." Kethulan's crystal form flickered with subdued acceptance. "We understand, Engineer. We have no right to complain about the terms." "No," So Young agreed bluntly. "You don't. The final phase of humanity's return came when Admiral Tae Hyun's fleet engaged the main swarm forces in the galactic core. The battle lasted for 6 days and involved weapons that reshaped entire star systems. When it ended, the Void Swarm had been completely eliminated from galactic space, their bioships destroyed, and their feeding grounds sterilized. But the galaxy that emerged from the crisis was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before humanity's departure. The Galactic Council was gone, replaced by the Human Protectorate. Every major world had human administrative centers. Every important technology was human-controlled. Every significant military force was under human command. Ambassador Hyun Woo, now serving as the first Director General of the Human Protectorate, addressed the surviving alien populations from the rebuilt council chambers on Nexus Prime. The old Galactic Council governed through consensus and compromise, he announced to the assembled representatives, who now served in purely advisory roles. This approach led to paralysis when decisive action was needed and nearly resulted in the destruction of galactic civilization. He paused, looking out at the aliens who had once looked down on him from elevated platforms. Now, they sat at ground level, while he spoke from above. The Human Protectorate governs through competence and authority. Human decisions are final and non-negotiable. In exchange, you receive protection, prosperity, and survival. These are the new terms of galactic civilization. Council Speaker Zeftar, now reduced to representing only the Velthari and holding no real authority, raised a tentative question. Director General, what assurance do we have that humanity will govern fairly? Hyun-woo looked down at the crystalline being who had once delivered humanity's ultimatum, and his expression was neither cruel nor kind, simply matter of fact. You have the assurance that we're competent enough to keep you alive and prosperous, and strong enough that you have no choice but to accept our rule. 2 years ago, you told us we were too dangerous to be partners. You were right. We are dangerous. The difference is that now we're your protection instead of your equals.